The jump is one of two techniques that we teach. The other technique, orchestral speech, is covered in the orchestral speech module. And as we explain in that module, orchestral speech can provide instant fluency and is great for getting you through situations in which it's important not to block. But on its own, it won't reduce your fear of blocking. In contrast, the benefits of the jump are more profound. And in particular, if you learn to use the jump properly, it should reduce both your fear of blocking and also the tendency to block in the future. Ultimately, it's best to have both techniques at your disposal. The jump is essentially a type of block modification technique, and in particular it's a technique to employ to help you to get out of a block after it's occurred. In fact, in order to become skilled in using this technique, you need to allow blocks to occur, and the more you allow them to occur, the better. A key advantage of the jump is that you don't need to use any technique whatsoever until you find yourself blocking. So, unlike orchestral speech, there's no advanced preparation needed. You can just allow yourself to speak completely spontaneously, and if you get stuck, that's okay. Indeed, it's good if you get stuck because that's an opportunity to practice jumping. The more you block, the more opportunities you have to practice quickly and easily getting out of blocks. The essence of jumping is that you accept your blocks when they occur and stop trying to say the sound that you're blocking on. Instead, you simply carry on to the next sound that you can say. Essentially, the jump is based upon a philosophy of pragmatic acceptance. To use the jump, start to speak completely spontaneously, without employing any technique whatsoever. Then, when you get stuck on a sound, immediately stop and give up trying to say that sound. Then, after a short pause, carry on from the next sound. So, for example, if I'm in a restaurant and I try to order a vegetable curry and I get stuck while trying to say the first sound, V, instead of going back and trying again to say it, I just give up trying to say the V, let go for a moment, and then simply carry on with the rest of it. Vegetable curry. So it might sound something like this. Vegetable curry, please. Of course, if I jump in this way, the V never actually gets said, but more often than not, the listener can guess what word I intended to say from the context. And indeed, often the listener doesn't even notice that the V was missing. The main difference between this and the more traditional block modification approaches is that with a jump you always keep moving forward. You don't keep trying to say the sound that you got stuck on. Instead, you simply give up on that sound and carry on with the rest of the phrase. As a result, you say as much as possible of what you can say, and only afterwards, and only if absolutely necessary, do you then go back to fill in the gaps. Most often, if you jump over the sound that you're having difficulty with, you'll find that you can get started on the next sound. Sometimes, however, you may find that you block on the next sound as well. If this happens, jump to the next word, and if necessary, keep jumping until you can get started again. Keep jumping even if it means missing whole words, and even if it means that you don't say enough of the phrase to enable your listener to understand you. The key is always to keep moving forward until you get to the end of the phrase you originally planned. Like that, you say as much as possible of what you can say before going back again to try again to say what you couldn't say. When you get to the end of the phrase, if and only if you find that you have missed too much of it and the listener hasn't understood, go back and say the entire phrase again. And if you need to go back and say the entire phrase again, to ensure that you're able to say as much of it as possible this time, try saying the phrase using orchestral speech instead of the jump, focusing this time on maintaining the forward flow, rather than on the individual sounds or words. Of course, sometimes when you jump over sounds, the listener will fail to understand what you were trying to say. Should this happen, carry on regardless to the end of the phrase. And then, once you get to the end, if it looks like the listener really hasn't understood, go back and say the phrase again. And when you do go back, do make sure that you repeat the entire phrase, not just the problem word. On the occasions when you have to repeat a phrase, to ensure that you're able to say as much of it as possible, try saying it using orchestral speech instead of the jump, and put a little less effort into saying it. This might seem counterintuitive, but it helps prevent you from falling into the trap of pushing too hard and becoming tense. And in any case, second time round, the listener is far more likely to understand you because he'll have already heard most of the words, so he can focus his attention just on the ones that he missed. Unlike other block modification techniques, the jump involves giving up on the sounds that you find yourself getting stuck on. This may sound like a form of avoidance, however, in reality it's quite the opposite. In fact, when practicing the jump correctly, if you anticipate that you might block on a word or have some difficulty saying it, it's important not to allow that anticipation to influence what you try to say. On the contrary, as far as possible, you should simply ignore such anticipations and allow anticipated blocks to happen. So really, the jump strongly promotes non-avoidance of blocks. Nevertheless, as mentioned previously, we don't advocate continuing to try to say a sound once you find yourself blocking on it. By jumping forwards to the remaining sounds, rather than sticking on the one that you're currently having difficulty with, the jump ensures that the psychological impact of a block is significantly less than it would otherwise be. This strategy helps greatly to reduce the fear of getting stuck on the same sound or words in the future. In reality, when practicing the jump, you probably will find that you do continue to occasionally repeat or prolong sounds that you're having difficulty moving on from. The habit of continuing to try to say the sounds that we're blocking on is often so deeply ingrained that it happens before you realize that you're doing it. If some repetitions and prolongations continue to happen when practicing the jump, that's fine, it's not a problem. But as soon as you realize that you're repeating or prolonging in this way, stop and jump to the next sound. Wherever possible, it's always best to use the jump as your primary technique to get you restarted when you block. When using the jump, don't be too perfectionistic. It doesn't matter if some words don't sound exactly like you would ideally like them to sound. All that matters is that the listener understands what you say. And don't repeat anything unless you absolutely have to. If the jump doesn't work and you find that you do have to repeat a phrase, it's generally better to do so using orchestral speech or some other fluency shaping technique, especially if you find yourself in a situation where there's time pressure. Then, if that doesn't work, don't keep trying. Instead, simply be pragmatic about getting the message across in whatever other way is possible. Feel free to substitute words, to use gestures, to point, or if necessary, to write it down. But whatever the case, be gentle and try not to use force. And if all else fails, or if you find yourself getting too stressed, it's okay to give up and to try again later.